Hello, everyone. Welcome to Monuments to Movements SpeakEasy Conversation Series. I'm Neysa Page-Lieberman, co-founder of M2M, along with Jane Sachs, and we are so thrilled to be joined today by the Guerrilla Girls, Marisa, Morán, Jahn, Hank Willis Thomas, to talk about art and politics. Before we get started, I want to draw your attention to our prompt that was on the intro slide, and it's also being posted in chat. We ask you to consider who is your community in 1 to 5 words or so. We define community as place, history, culture, spirit, identity, or however you want to define it. And this will be connected to a second prompt later in the program. So we ask you to put your answers into chat. And you may ask, why are we doing this exercise about my identity? So in our work at Monuments to Movements, we seek to shift the conversation around why, how, and who gets monumentalized. And we invite your participation in addressing these questions. So we feel like most of us have not seen the story of our community monumentalized in public space, and that's why we do this exercise. It's to empower and encourage ourselves to imagine your monument, my monument, our monument, and to enact it together. So later we'll post a second part to this prompt, and then we'll read some of these answers together. So SpeakEasy is M2M's public conversation series where we discuss our current initiatives and related ideas with our collaborators. So we kicked off about a year ago and we're already in season 2. And so if you haven't seen our lineup yet, you can grab that in chat and you can view and register for future programs. You'll also find a link to last season's highlight reel where you can catch up on the whole season in under 15 minutes and be completely up to date with everything we've talked about. So a few quick housekeeping notes. Today's program will be recorded and uploaded on YouTube and on our website, so you can watch it as many times as you want, and chat is enabled. We'll be popping in links, and that's where you can also post comments, and live transcription is enabled as well, should you want that tool. So when we get to the Q&A portion of today's program, please use the Q&A tool that you can find at the bottom of your window. That's where we're going to look to grab questions for our panelists. So every time we do a speakeasy or an in-person public conversation, we have so many new people, just like today, lots of people that we are virtually meeting for the same time, and we love that. We're so glad you came. We hope you come back. So if you're new and this is your introduction to Monuments to Movements, we are an international organization that envisions, develops, and commissions public artwork that monumentalizes movement making and collective action. The growing team behind M2M includes Marcela Andrade, Kelsey Bogdan, Josue Esau, and Aarya, Malik. And we're joined by an expansive international group of movement builders that you can find on our website. M2M offers a new vision and an evolving process that is not just inclusive of the world's diversity, but also paradigm shifting, feminist, and centered in restorative justice. So just a few of the things we do: we have monuments in the works about climate change, about evolving democracy, about labor. We have public conversations like this one in which we hope to make our work accessible. We've commissioned a short essay series called Deeper Stories about personal identity and monuments. And we've created the first ever archive of public art about movement building, and that is crowdsourced. And so we are always looking for people to help us build that archive. So let's take a quick minute to talk about why we're having this discussion today, a conversation about creative practice and politics that is a week out from the United States midterm elections, as if maybe you haven't heard, right? It's like we're all talking about this right now. M2M is a creative practice at the intersection of social justice, and we're always drawn to and inspired by artists, thinkers, and activists who work to challenge, inform, and affect public opinion, values, knowledge, and even policy, as you'll hear about today. So Jane and I have had the great privilege of working with the panelists that I'm going to introduce in a second over many years. And so we know how much they've already offered to this larger dialogue, and we know how much they'll share with you today. We're going to talk about tools and strategies and values and outcomes and creative practice that intersect with activism and movement building. We're going to hear from them. We hope to hear from you, because together we are the collective that can affect change. So now I finally get to introduce our guests. I'm going to start with the Guerrilla Girls, and today we have with us Kata Kolwitz, who is one of the original founders of the Guerrilla Girls, so we're really excited and lucky to have her today. The Guerrilla Girls are anonymous artist activists who use disruptive headlines, outrageous visuals, and killer statistics to expose gender and ethnic bias and corruption in art, film, politics, and pop culture. They believe in an intersectional feminism that fights for human rights for all people. They undermine the mainstream narrative by revealing the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. The Guerrilla Girls have done hundreds of projects, street posters, banners, actions, books, videos, and more, and interventions and exhibitions at art museums, blasting these institutions on their own walls for their bad behavior, including a projection on the Whitney Museum about the super rich hijacking art. Their latest book, Guerrilla Girls, The Art of Behaving Badly, collects hundreds of their projects from 1985 to 2020 and was named one of the best art books by the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. Recently, their work was at Tate Modern and Whitechapel, London, Sao Paulo Museum of Art, the Venice Biennale, Van Gogh Museum, Amsterdam, Museum of Military History in Dresden, Art Basel, Hong Kong, and many other places. The Guerrilla Girls motto is, do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't work, do another anyway. Keep chipping away. Marisa Jahn is an artist, filmmaker, and transmedia producer of Ecuadorian and Chinese descent. Marisa's work redistributes power, exemplifies the possibilities of art as social practice, and injects humor into public spaces and discourses. Co-designed with youth, new immigrants, and working families, Jahn's civic scale projects have engaged millions both on the street and at venues such as the Museum of Modern Art, the Venice Biennale of Architecture, the United Nations, Tribeca Film Festival, and Obama's White House. Jahn collaborated with the National Domestic Workers Alliance to create a social practice artwork called Care Force, which included a PBS film that amplifies care workers' voices. This movement for domestic workers' rights has contributed to new laws in 10 states and a federal bill underway. In 2020, CareForce informed the creation of Care House, an artwork that is also the US's first care-based co-housing building. Jahn has taught at Columbia University, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also her alma mater, the Parsons New School, where she is the Director of Integrated Design. She was a 2022 Sundance Fellow, senior researcher at MIT, and an artist in residence at the National Public Housing Museum. Hank Willis Thomas is a conceptual artist working primarily with themes related to perspective, identity, commodity, media, and popular culture. His work often incorporates widely recognizable icons and how these symbols can reinforce generalizations developed around race, gender, and ethnicity. Thomas asks us to consider who is included in history and who is erased, revealing the complicated nature of storytelling and the bias of history. His work has been exhibited throughout the United States and abroad, including the International Center of Photography, New York, Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao, Spain, Musée du Quai Branly, Paris, Hong Kong Art Center, and the Witte de With Center for Contemporary Art in the Netherlands. Permanent public works include Unity in Brooklyn, New York, Love Over Rules in San Francisco, California, and All Power to All People in Opa-locka, Florida. His collaborative projects include Question Bridge, Black Males in Search of the Truth Booth, The Writing on the Wall, and For Freedoms. Thomas co-founded For Freedoms as a platform for creative civic engagement in America. For Freedoms, the freedoms of speech, of worship, from want, and from fear, use art to encourage and deepen public explorations of freedom in the 21st century. Okay, so we are so excited to have the Guerrilla Girls, Marisa and Hank with us, and they're going to do very brief presentations, 5 minutes each, and then you'll see links in chat if you want to learn more about them. Okay, so we are going to kick it off with the Guerrilla Girls. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Kata Kolwitz, a founder of the Guerrilla Girls, and I've been involved with just about everything the group has done from 1985 to today. We love doing this game-changing work about sexism, racism, corruption, and abuse in art, culture, and politics. We try to create political art that uses using the persuasive strategies of advertising and showing people something they didn't know before. We always look for some new information that just might have the power to change people's minds. Next slide, please. Let's see. I'm going to show just a few of our hundreds of projects, but of course you can see almost all of them at guerrillagirls.com. Next slide, please. This 1989 street poster is a perfect example of how we craft our work, using in-your-face headlines, design, and statistics. We always try to twist an issue around and present it in a way that's never been seen before. Next, yes. You know, chance, as all of us know, is so important in creating effective activist art, just as it's crucial in creating any kind of art at all. And recently, we were working on a poster about the US commemorative months for different groups. And we were having a really hard time fitting the long word discrimination into our poster when suddenly it's like a light bulb went off in our heads. Discrimination contains the word nation. This is now a video animated billboard on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. Next, please. We took this poster to a march in 1992, and people around us were absolutely shocked at the headline until they read the fine print, which says, before the mid-19th century, abortion was legal. Even the Catholic Church did not forbid it until 1869. We often like to try to combine two issues, and which sometimes can add something to our message. And we wanted to reclaim the idea of traditional values. I mean, what the hell are traditional values anyway? They're used by you know, the right wing to oppress people, but we're a country, if you really want to talk about traditional values, there's no one way, and there's no one traditional value. Next, please. Here's a new poster about abortion. Meet the creeps who stripped away our abortion rights. And it has lots of interesting information about each of these people who, you know, are all part of a cult and are trying to take away basically all of our rights. Next. Could you just play this video, and it can just go till it stops, just to see what it, can you, yeah, okay. Okay, so we did our first Guerrilla Girls Code of Ethics monument as a poster, but we always wanted to build an actual portable version and take it around to museums. In September, we finally were able to make that happen. Next, please. Next, yeah, so just showing you a couple of close-ups of this crazy, crazy thing. It's kind of a prop monument with a, not marble, but a marble-looking sleeve that goes over a structure. And we dragged it in front of 4 New York museums, the Met, the Whitney, the Guggenheim, and MoMA. We had great convos with people who passed by, including some museum guards. When we asked the Whitney guards if they were worried about getting in trouble for speaking to us, they said, hell no, we're unionized. PBS's R21 filmed the entire 2 days of actions that we did, and will air the results in 2023. And we hope to bring this monument all over the country to many, many cities in the future. So I'll just read you like a couple of our codes. Thou shalt banish board members whose businesses make the world a worse place. Out with money launderers, arms dealers, inside traders, climate change deniers, polluters, antiquity smugglers, addictive drug manufacturers, student loan sharks, and associates of Jeffrey Epstein. And of course, the most important one at the end. If thou dost not show art and hire staff as diverse as the culture thou claimest to represent, admit thou dost not exhibit the history of art, only the history of wealth and power. Next. All right, so Sexual exploitation, domination and abuse are everywhere in our culture, including the art world. So should a museum acknowledge an artist's sexual abuse when they show his work? You're looking at the official portrait of President Bill Clinton, which hangs in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., painted by Chuck Close, an artist who, like Clinton, was accused of sexual abuse. What should a museum do about this? We have a few ideas to help them. Next slide, please. 3 ways to write a museum wall label when the artist is a sexual predator. And I think you can read these, but the first one, of course, is for museums afraid of alienating billionaire trustees and collectors who donated the artist's work. Then for museums conflicted about disclosing an artist's abuse next to his art. And then for museums who need help from the Guerrilla Girls. And each one starts with, Chuck Close is one of the most important artists of his generation and the creator of a new kind of portraiture consisting of patterns of color. And then each successive one, which you can see, adds another way to kind of look at it. If you're a reticent museum, you can add to that. Like many artists, he has had a few disgruntled employees. And then for our own wall label, we kind of went all out and discussed exactly what he'd been accused of. And it's a real question. I mean, you know, when we do things, we do it in an outrageous manner. Usually, we love doing it in an outrageous manner. But these are questions that museums really have to face, along with all the other things they have to face today. Okay, thank you. Oh, I forgot the most important one. Okay, so lastly, we did this billboard for Hank Willis Thomas's Great for Freedoms organization. So it was out in the boonies in some state, and it's about one of our and the world's crucial issues, income inequality. Dear boss, your mansions and fancy stuff cost a lot. No wonder you don't pay us a living wage. Okay, that's it.
So I wanted to start by mentioning that, so Lori Jo Reynolds has talked about and written about what she calls legislative art. And the performance artist and scholar Larry Boga has written about electoral guerrilla politics, which I've also written about. And there's, I think Neysa is going to put a link in the chat to that. But I think of my work as para-electoral art. So it sits alongside electoral politics and has a different time scales, and sometimes maybe shorter or longer, but is shorter than, for example, geologic time. And so I'm going to go through a case example. Next slide, please. And I want to start with a story, which is that, well, so my mother is from Ecuador and my father is from China, and they both voted for Trump. So when I think about this question of who are the communities that you talk about, I mean, among them are people, you know, people on both sides and different parties and who hold different political opinions than myself. And I feel like, you know, if since the 1970s, the Republican Party has garnered 30% of the Latinx vote, you know, if this comes as a surprise to you, then it means that we have a lot of listening to do. So next slide, please. So a lot of my work involves positioning artwork as a visual tool to bring people together from different kinds of backgrounds, and also involves a lot of listening and learning. And when my son was born, New York State had passed the first Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, and to get the word out to the state's 200,000 domestic workers, I created the nanny van, which unpacks and unfolds and pops up in parks, markets, public spaces. And as the movement started growing, my newborn and my team and I went across the country in first the nanny van, and then second the Care Force one. So next slide, please. In both cases, we, while we started first speaking with domestic workers, which is nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers, there's 2.5 million in the US. I found myself quickly in conversation with domestic employers. So that's people like myself who employ a nanny or, help with childcare, elder care, caring for our homes, and so forth. And so that really broaches a really huge swath of the American public. And so I created this film, Care Force One Travelogues, and which is available on PBS, and which is, PBS is America's #1 trusted media source. And I was really seeking to impact and speak to this, a really broad demographic and American families. And next slide, please. And as I was, in the 12 years that I've been working with domestic workers and domestic employers, over and over, I keep on hearing about the housing and the care crisis. So the toll of isolation, the unavailability of homes, which are outdated and address the needs of only nuclear families. And also the isolation and unaffordability of care. So I in the kind of next phase or extension of this Care Force project, what I wanted to do was to create something on an architectural and urban scale that lifts up and monumentalizes care and visibilizes that. And so I approached, next slide, please. So I started with a real estate, first with an architect, Rafi Seagal, and a real estate developer, Ernst Valerie, what we call Care House, which is the US's first care-based co-housing project based in Baltimore. Next slide, please. And we did a number of, we have a number of advisors, and we did a number of co-design workshops, which are iterative and ongoing. Next slide, please. And so these are our objectives with Care House. And here I want to point out that in the majority of senior care, really the care, quote, care consumer is what's being centered, but statistically, there's not enough hands to go around to meet the caregiving needs of those who need it. And so if you don't center the needs of domestic workers and their families, then you really have nothing. So that's one of our value added, as well as insisting on the importance of art. Next slide, please. And so as I've been developing this project, which breaks ground in Baltimore in 2023 and opens in 2024, I really found myself going through a lot of policy and asking this question of, well, how could this strategy of what we're calling care-based co-housing scale, and what would incentivize and help shift the mindset of the public sector and private sector? And so I published this policy paper with a research team from MIT that I led, and it was circulated to members of Congress on a federal level, but is also something that is being shared and referenced on a local mayoral level as well. Next slide, please. And so I'm continuing that work as an artist in resident with the National Public Housing Museum. I think that's, there you have it. Oh, I guess lastly, it was mentioned in the bio, but while these different projects have gone into art venues and so forth, I mean, I really find myself speaking to and interested in speaking with different public sector and civil society policymakers, which is one of the constituencies that I seek to address. Thank you. I'll skip this.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hank Willis Thomas, and I had the strange fortune of going third in this case, and been very humbled and inspired by the work that we've seen so far, and happy to share some of my work. And it's important for me to point out that firstly, nothing I would have done would be possible if it wasn't for the work of the Guerrilla Girls, who were some of the first artists whose work I encountered and thought that, rethought everything, frankly, and I say, okay, now there's a way in which I can participate in the art world without losing my connection to my core self. And it's been great over the past decade plus to be working alongside Marisa and seeing all the ways that she's expanded the meaning of the word art and artist. One of the ways that I tend to actually not to refer to myself as an artist when I'm asked. I always find it most important to highlight that I'm a person, because for many of my ancestors throughout most of time on this continent, our humanity was not seen as something of value or that existed at all. And that my creative practice is actually a practice that is inspiring others, including myself, to highlight and acknowledge the humanity of people who look like me. One of the ways that I get to do that is by creating art that is designed to inspire conversation and to reshape what we already know. So this is a piece that I did in 2017 called All Power to All People. And it was this case, a 9-foot Afropic sculpture that was at Police Plaza in Philadelphia, right across the street from City Hall. And my father was a Black Panther. My mother grew up in Philadelphia. And I grew up kind of seeing all of these monuments and images all over Philadelphia. But one of the monuments that we had in our home, almost every African-American home, was the Afropic with the fist. And I wanted to highlight the monumental reality that is solidarity through community, and the way in which Black power was a way to claim beauty and liberty for the disenfranchised. And so we can go to the next slide. I also think of myself as a creative patriot who is also not a nationalist, understanding that there is something very potent and beautiful in the dream that is, quote unquote, America, all of the Americas, not just the United States of America. There's also obviously a irony and a hypocrisy, and living in all of that is where I am most inspired. So here we see 3 pieces. One of them on the left is basically a series of American flags that are designed to recall the relationship to bars that are in the Stars and Bars. And I've been doing several monuments and memorials to victims of gun violence using the stars on American flags. And then in front of that is Peace Liberty, which is inspired by the Statue of Liberty, which I, next slide, was able to put in 22-foot bronze sculpture at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. And the meaning of a 22-foot bronze arm, in this case, is the arm of Joel Embiid, an NBA player who is also an immigrant from Africa. The idea of putting a 22-foot arm pointing to the sky of an African giant was something that I felt would have all kinds of meaning and kind of suggestion without being overt, but also recognizing that the symbol could mean so many different things to whoever's looking at it. And one of the things that I find this sculpture really inspires is unity. And next slide. Throughout the, oh, actually you can go back, sorry. Throughout the uprisings in 2020 in New York, this sculpture wound up being a rallying point. And that was definitely something that I was hoping for, that the piece could be some form of a call to action or a coming together. Next slide. Within the context of my broader work, For Freedoms, which is a collaboration with several people, dozens, if not hundreds of people. The term is co-founded, but I didn't find anything. I just happened to be among the people who brought it together. And it is designed to, in the legacy of the Guerrilla Girls, to invite people from various perspectives, except to use their voices, to use their stories, to use their understanding of storytelling to imagine a better, more just and more inclusive society. And so in this case, we reimagined Norman Rockwell's 1940s rendition of the United States of America in his For Freedoms paintings in what we believe is a much more heterogeneous and much more kind of authentic representation of what the United States might have looked like then and now. And next slide. One of the ways in which we also were able, with For Freedoms, we did billboards. We've done several hundred billboards all over the country and in some other countries. And each of them is typically designed by an artist, like you saw the Guerrilla Girls one. This one kind of has no name because a lot of us worked on it, but we found it fascinating that the previous 5 presidents all said, "Make America Great Again," always meaning something different. And when we look back throughout the history of the United States of America, looking for that point when it was great, we kind of came to the conclusion that perhaps the greatest moment was when young, disenfranchised and poor people stood up gracefully with dignity, love, and nonviolence to the brutality of the government that they were oppressed by, and through their humanity were able to impact to reorient the direction of the nation through their work. And so that was our interpretation of it. We put that in Mississippi. Next slide. Another billboard that I did in the form of a question was, "Who taught you to love?" Which is at the core of all of the work that I do, is reminding myself about my relationship to love, where where does love center in my work, and how our relationships to love can also dictate what we think we're valuable, what dictate our own notion of our own value and our relationship to others. And putting these kinds of questions in public space really invites people to reimagine and reconsider who they are and what's important to them. Next slide. For Freedoms, I'm going to keep going, is a current project that we're doing in residence at the Brooklyn Museum, realizing that the news is a landscape where people get to say what's important and then all of a sudden make it important. And for too long, what's been important has been things that divide us rather than bring us together or inspire us to imagine a better, more whole society. And so we've been piloting that out with For Freedoms at the Brooklyn Museum. Next slide. This is a piece on the left. On the right is one of the memorials to victims of gun violence. And on the left is the Embrace, which is here it's a 5-foot version, but you can look at the next slide and see that it is actually going to be a monumental sculpture. And This is a sculpture that is inspired by the love of Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. Next slide. And their embrace. And so there's a moment when he won the Nobel Prize, and I believe it's the next slide. Can't see the order, so, oh, no, there we are. So this moment when he won the Nobel Prize in 1963, 64, where he was embracing his wife. I saw this picture and was, it became clear that his weight was on top of her and that she was holding him up, and that it was a shared legacy, and that her pride in him and his glee were part of what they were working towards. And still, through them embracing each other, we can feel the ripple effects decades later. And so if you go back to, I think 2 slides, one more, and you can see that this is going, oh yeah, so this is where we are now. And in 2 months, this will be the reality. This is a 22-foot bronze rendering of that embrace that's going to be in Boston Common. It's going to be the largest public memorial to love in the country. We have so many monuments to violence and to heroes of violence and victims of violence, but not many to nonviolence and to heroes of nonviolence. And we believe that this piece, you can look at the next slide, will be a game changer in how we value our society and how we think about who's important, what's important, and where we can go from here. So thank you all.
Thank you all. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the overlapping ideas and then the very different approaches and ways of actually communicating with yourself to do your work. And it's really a pleasure to have you all here personally as well. Actually, over my daughter's bed is Who Taught You How to Love. So that's the thing she wakes up and sees all the time. I want to make sure that I read some of the answers to the first prompt. You know, who is your community? So ancestors, lovers, makers, everyone in between. Patriarchy smashers in a red state, fertile ground, educators challenging traditional modes of teaching, secular humanist raising radically minded kids, also diverse and united Brooklynites or Brooklyn. And let's see, queer anarchist hairstylists. I love that one. And also Jewish women with open hearts, organizing actions in urban areas in Germany. And that's just a few of them. So keep adding. And while you're thinking about who your community is, I want you to think about the next prompt, which is to describe what a monument to your community might be. The location, the medium, the representation in up to 5 words. So what would a monument be to the community that you've identified? All of the living people is our first answer from Hank.
Oh,
but
that was my monument.
I know.
No, that was my that's my community.
That was your community. That's great. So add your community if you haven't, but also move on to the monument, and we'll read them at the end. And there's some things that really came up in the talk that I just want to kind of reinforce, but also talk about where M2M kind of fits into that. And, we really believe that art and culture are inherently political because they push us to question and respond and risk and reflect and experiment and fail and love. And it really changes the course. And, whether it's a poem or something large scale, I mean, You know, I don't know if you've all been reading today about some of the people that are most excited about the election in Brazil are the artists. You know, they want their voice back. They want their freedom back. They want to keep, you know, reflecting back to society and themselves who they are and who they want to be. And so it's really kind of an incredible thing to again realize that art and culture at the center of all human evolution and revolution throughout history. So it's also why art can be so risky, you know, is because it really is driven by the idea of creating new modes of civic participation, social impact, you know, and it's really the idea that you don't drain out aesthetics and pour in social impact, right? But that these two things are actually constantly woven together. And for Neysa and myself, it's in this context that, you know, this context of rolling heads and empty pedestals, where the necessity to create M2M came from. And this idea of monuments to movements, to collective action, to humanity, to what we accomplish together or what we try together. Doesn't even mean we get there, but the idea that we are in a process of experimenting together. And it's in the context of those monuments coming down that we were saying, look, there's questions missing, and there's reflections missing, and people are missing, and places and approaches and processes and practices. And the idea is that, you know, if we knock down a statue today, and I'm all for it, but we're still the people we were yesterday who put up that statue decades or centuries ago, and we kept it there all the way until yesterday. So when we were asked to sit on all these committees and advisories for cities and institutions evaluating monuments, we were like, that's not the question. You know, that's not the question. We want to ask, you know, what is the greatest accomplishments of societies and communities? And just to close, we really believe that answer includes the necessity to collaborate and work together. We believe that there is a close and inherent relationship between art and justice. And what it is humanity. You know, you can't have humanity without the kinds of things that art and justice bring to it. So let me kind of launch into the idea of context. When I mentioned that the context that we created Monuments to Movements was, you know, let's forget the hero worship, let's kill the hero worship, and let's get to the essence of what civic action and civic dialogue is about. And so M2M is a paradigm shifting organization, vision, mission, and we see all of you as having that paradigm shifting vision in your practices. And now we want to ask you, you know, what are some of the essential ingredients, seen or unseen, of your creative practice and tactics? And then because, you know, we're all growing up and have been doing this work for different amounts of decades or half decades or, you know, not centuries yet, you know, how has that changed over time for you? And how has that, what's essential to you, how has that shifted? Maybe we'll start with the Guerrilla Girls.
The state of the world now is so unbelievably horrible, but we are in an incredible age of activism. And activism is just, you know, doing one thing and then doing another. And I think what we've learned over the years, and you know, informed by so many of our members in different ways, and our own experience in the world, we've learned that if you want it, we try to change people's minds. Okay, so we don't always succeed, of course, but that's what we try to do. And to do that, you have to show somebody something they didn't know before. You somehow have to twist an issue around and present it in a way that hopefully is unforgettable, but at the very least makes allows people to think about things in a different way. I'm not saying you succeed at that all the time, but that is our goal. And I think for all activists, it's very easy just to point to something and say, this is bad. But what you've seen today from the three of us and from you, Monuments to Movements also, is that there are really game-changing ways of breaking through. I mean, you're not going to forget the work of Marisa or Hank ever. You see something like that, and it's going to always stay with you, and it's going to change your worldview. That's what we try to do too.
And that's what's essential. Hank, do you want to jump in?
What would you like me to say?
That's up to you. That's not my work to put words in your mouth. No, but what do you, what's essential to your practice? What's, all of this work lives in a context, right? And the context is ever changing. But what are the kind of essential ingredients, of the work that you're trying to do? What has to be present in you, in the world, in your collaborators, in your dreams, in the people you love? Like, what has to be there?
My work doesn't have boundaries or limits. So it's my breath. That's that. If I'm not breathing, then can't do it. And it's like kind of obvious, but it's also the most important thing to remember. And I tend to often get short of breath or not breathe, or I can't breathe through my nose right now. I'm not really conscious of my full lung capacity. And I'm also one day won't be breathing. I'm also facing that reality. And so the work will continue, but when I think about my relationship to it, it's the fact that I am alive.
Yeah, pretty essential. No bells and whistles. That's the only bell, only whistle is the breath. Beautiful. Marisa, do you want to just jump in?
Yeah, so when I grew up in the South for the first 10 years of my life, and my mom asked me what I wanted to be, and I was interested in politics, and she said, well, you could be an ambassador's wife. And I said, well, no, I want to be the ambassador. And so I feel like I am interested and challenged by in my artwork to speak to diverse audiences and have the work resonate in different realms, and learn from how it's interpreted or misinterpreted, and incorporate that. So I feel like essential ingredient for me is, I love thinking through, and I'm always quite clear with the art institutions that I'm in, cultural institutions that I'm engaged with, how to leverage that cultural capital to arrogate or distribute power. Yeah, so I think ambassadorship is what I would say.
That ambassadorship is at the center. Such an interesting thing, this idea of like, having a goal of changing a mind, or, moving something, and having anything be filled with your breath. And if it isn't, it's nowhere. But then also being the ambassador and the guide of it. I think we think a lot about opening minds, and that's really including ours. It's not like we're changing somebody else, right? And I always say our work has no end user. And, it's not to land anywhere in particular as much as to just keep folding people and ideas and breaths in as we go forward. Let me ask you another question about, You know, I mean, one of the so-called rules in like, you know, cultural guerrilla warfare is kind of to know the terrain, you know, and use it as a powerful tool. And that's a very particular way of thinking about it. You know, this idea that it's a fight, and throughout history that definitely has been present. But, you know, at this point, we're not looking at concrete maps or addressing, you know, things like, you know, tunnels, but more thinking about a political terrain, a human terrain, a landscape of stories and symbols and spectacles, more about the heartbeat. And so how do you assess the context, the cultural topography or the human topography in which you work and that you all engage so effectively? How do you think about that emotional, creative topography and how you use what you know about it or what you learn about it in the work that you do? Can we start with you, Marisa?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I do a ton of research to inform the work that I do. So I read scholarly work, I do a lot of firsthand ethnographic work. And I do the interviews myself, and I love to find, to translate, you know, an interview which has so much rich information. And then I approach it really like a journalist. I kind of like fact check against a billion sources. And I love me a good policy paper. I love taking trains and planes because I print policy papers and devour those. But I also, it's like somewhere in between policy papers and, you know, like the beautiful phrase that someone is sharing with you, which I like, a story, which I feel like is a gift to receive. And a lot of my work also, I feel like I guess I think of those kind of as gems, and a lot of my work is kind of centered on very specific people and the communities that they represent. So it's like always very rooted.
Hank? What do you think about like context? Do you think
Well,
about that?
what was the different? What was the version? The words used for Marisa? What were the
How do you assess the context, the cultural topography?
cultural topography? That was the term for the framework.
And now you're gonna rip it apart.
No. I got hung on that phrase, the cultural topography, because I'm just, the question creates a visual representation of something that I'm now sorting through, you know. And I think when I think about cultural topography, I think about the past, the present, and the future layers of it. And this current present of cultural topography, the cultural topography of this current moment isn't one that I enjoy being immersed in, yet and still. It is something that I am immersed in, right? So it is my air. So I was impressed by Marisa reading. How do you do that? Because I have so many books all around, but I'm like, how do I get to like contemporary scholarly works? Like, I'm still not done processing things from 10 years ago. Of course, I have read recent books, but the way you said it made me feel like there was like, you're like, I want to just sit with you, huh? Because there's the reality that I experience, that social media is a cultural landscape that is fully immersive, right? And the news is another one that's fully immersive, and that things that are more thoughtful, which happen to be often in books, and sometimes in documentaries, to create that brain space seems that much harder. I do have 2 babies, so it's a lot harder with that too. But I believe that I'm holding on to a thread of truth that comes straight out of my heart, that existed before I existed. So that thread of truth that was in my ancestors, that what we call ancestral intelligence, and threading that into the lives of my descendants, not just the ones that come out of my loins, so to speak, but anyone and any human relative of mine to follow. So that's my answer.
Oh, I mean, that's a great answer, both of you. I think the idea that topography is bigger, it's not just landscape. And so I think, that like in ecology, there's different elements that are stronger at different times, right? Like in ecology, things are equitable, but not equal. So you need water or oxygen. I need oxygen right now. And so when I think of topography, it does include all that changing and how you kind of let these things in or not. Let me move to another question, and then Neysa's going to ask questions from the audience, and also we have more. But thinking about, making art for and with public spaces, because I think of public space as, you are collaborating with whatever realm you exist in, whether that's physical or concrete or not emotional. It's central to all of your practices, and, you really take the kinds of things you're struggling with head on. You aren't kind of tiptoeing around it and kind of figuring out. You're really going straight forward to really immerse yourselves in really authentic ways. And how and why has the intersection of public art and movement making kind of become integral to your work? I mean, because the movement of love is one in which I was born into, having grown up in the late 60s and the 70s, right? And how is that intersection become so integral to the work you do as a human, as well as the kind of art and cultural work you do? Katya, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Well, when the Guerrilla Girls started all those years ago, we loved the street. We loved seeing what was in the street. We liked all the crap that was posted and torn up and, the arguments in the street and everything. And that was our goal, to be part of that and to put something not to have gatekeepers. The art world is all about gatekeepers. You're important, you're not. And I think what all of us have done is go somewhere else. And it's not that we're not in museums, galleries, whatever, but we're doing a whole new kind of work for any audience that wants to see it. And I do think it's very important not to assume anything about people who are going to see it, which is why it's usually important to me to tell people something they didn't know before. And then they have a choice. If it works, often it does change their minds forever. And if it doesn't, they move on, and we move on to trying again to do it differently and do it better. And because, I don't think when we started, we thought about whether what we were doing was art or not. Like, we didn't care about that. We just wanted to deal with these issues on the street. And we still love the streets best. Now we have the opportunity to use things on the street, which is fantastic. But I think it's just so important not to assume. I see so much political art that doesn't really communicate to people who don't already agree with it. And that's the real challenge. And that's why it was great listening to Marisa and Hank today, because you both have developed ways to really connect with people, which is that's been our whole life too. And we feel very honored that we have connected with so many people.
Anybody else? Hank's hand or Marisa's thoughtful glare?
Well, I definitely, as I said, when I talked about how I'm connecting to a truth that was before me and then passing it on, I was alive when the Guerrilla Girls was formed, but they also became part of my ancestors. And that's what I'm always thinking about is, I mean, there are also ancestors that I have that are not the ones I would like to acknowledge and highlight and carry and have them continue to live through me. But that's also something that I think a lot about is that, you know, the patriarchy and sexism and homophobia and racism and transphobia and just violent loving the United States that I grew up in is in me, you know, and it's very much a part of me, right? So I also know that that's also how I get to heal is by acknowledging it. If I can't diagnose all of the poisons that are in my veins and in my DNA, in my mentality, then how could I ever address them? And so part of my work also is to realize that if we're all part of the problem, that means we can all be part of the solution. And that's a critical thing for me, because oftentimes we ostracize people who we see as the biggest example of the problem. And then they take a lot of people that we don't want to go with them. And now we have people in our family that are, you know, with these people who are strangers to everything we value.
Marisa?
Well, I forgot what the original question was, but I am going to riff off what
Yeah.
Hank was
Answer
just
whatever you
talking
want.
about. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's all kinds of ways to think about ancestors and allyship. You know, I mean, I think, I mean, my family is just scattered across the globe, and it's not a traditional nuclear family. And to be honest, it's not the strongest. My own nuclear family isn't the strongest set of threads in my life. It's like I really identify with kind of more broadly immigrants and new immigrants who came to, you know, my backyard is the United States. And thinking about the informal work sector and seeing, you know, BIPOC women as, you know, if I'm ever timid or afraid of speaking up, and I think about, well, it's not for me, it's also for all these other individuals who I feel connected to, my ancestors. And I think that I think art is interesting because of, you know, like these different kinds of temporalities in which it works, from blood memories and ancestorship and to, you know, like also, I mean, you know, seeing the work like the Guerrilla Girls is like really, you know, when you're a younger person and you see something that really shakes you up, it's like, it's just like such a spark, and it can interrupt that, you know, your trajectory that you might have otherwise taken. And then, you know, things like the your public art monument, Hank, which is so beautiful and really moving, and that idea of like an embrace and monumentalizing that gesture and that reciprocity and that interdependence, and that interdependence that we often don't see, you know, this partnership, or see enough, in the way that we don't also see care enough, which is like all the essential things to make that 1% above the iceberg. You know, we are often just seeing that iceberg tip, you know. So like, you know, there's these other kind of long-term time spans versus the kind of interruptive moments, you know, seeing the billboards and seeing performative interventions and so forth, which are like, wow.
Neysa, do you want to follow up with another question?
I am going to shift over to responses to our second prompt because we're getting so many good ones. I don't know that I'll be able to read them all, but I'm going to give a sampling. So we first asked you all, to identify your community. And then we asked you to imagine a monument to your community. So we have a safe space free of the gaze, imagination, empathy, consensus, thought, and care, memory, cuentos or stories, and aspirations, performative work of theatrics, both for protest and celebration, familiar materials to communicate new ideas, rituals, trans-temporal gatherings of living people, ancestors, descendants. So we love this so much. I'm always so surprised and delighted by these answers, and just knowing that everybody envisions a monument to their community so differently. No one ever says, I'd really like a guy on a horse. It's never come up in chat. And so why do we have this everywhere? I guess we all know the answers to that. But look at all these other ideas that we've come up with together and that we can build together. So I am going to ask a question from the audience, which is very nice because it is a question that Jane and I wanted to ask and ran out of time. And so I'm going to try to combine these. So this is about youth empowered movements. So Jane and I had in our question said, around the world, we're seeing life-risking, self-empowering activism of young people. And Jane and I, and I'm sure many of you are really inspired by youth-led movements like gender and race equity, reproductive justice, and climate in the US and globally. We're seeing women's rights and freedom struggles in Iran, water rights in India, to name only a few. And what we recognize is our three panelists today all got started in this kind of work very, very young. And so I can only imagine when you see these movements of the next generation, it might resonate with you. And so our question was about, what are some youth movements that you're looking at right now that are inspiring you? Marisa, would you like to start?
To be honest, I feel inspired all the time by not only the artwork that I see, but also the platforms that I see young people building to the networks and communities that are value driven. The last time I'm based in New York, but the last time I was in Baltimore a few weeks ago, I met these really awesome entrepreneurs that go by the name Black Ass Flea Market, and there's like 150 vendors, and their goal is to lift up local artisans and keep the dollar in Baltimore. And they were just fantastic and open and ready to collaborate. So, and then like in the same group of people, there was a young woman who I used to work with at MIT, who with her two other architects started a group called Hire Ukrainian Designers, which was interesting. And in solidarity, she is Tatar, Russian born. And, I love so many examples of people. I love in general artists who, like Hank and the Guerrilla Girls, who are both doing the work in the field and producing and creating and doing hands-on work, but also building platforms and lifting up others. I think to me, that's a really essential part of creating the world that you want to see.
Anybody else want to jump in quickly?
There's a larger thing at stake that I always come to, which is having a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old is, what is their future?
Mm-hmm.
And as I watch them grow, I watch them choosing in and opting into a very complex world. And I am seeing it as part of my responsibility to encourage them to take on as much as they can while also letting go of as much as they can. And one thing I'm excited about, the generation or two ahead of them, that's not mine, of course, is that this is a generation of people who understand that they have a role to play in society and that their voices matter and that they can have impact and influence far beyond their age. And that's something that I see happening in a multitude of ways. And I just am looking forward to seeing the fruits of that for my children.
Yeah, I think that is a really important thing to stress, which is, the idea of what I was saying about an ecology, right? And that it's not equal, but it's equitable. And so there are different things you need at different times in different amounts. But as the world and life becomes more complex, there are parts of that ecology that are new or have gone out of control or haven't been recognized, and really looking at this moment and how engaged people are, and actually wanting to be, and for me, art is a major kind of drive, maybe invitation, offering. I mean, it's how I got involved in the anti-apartheid movement, was Artists Against Apartheid. And so it was one thing a lot of people say is that it's art that brings you to struggle as opposed to bringing the struggle into art. We all go towards the tension, right? But also, what does that mean to alleviate it? So I really want to thank all of you for making time fly, but also being very thoughtful and sometimes silently thoughtful, which is really important. I just put in my calendar huge blocks of time to read. And I just did that a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, no, this is your reading week. This is your moment. And I just want to make sure that everyone fills out the survey. We would love to hear back, constructive criticism, ideas, things that you think we should address and talk about, and people we might invite, also how you enjoyed this program. And then I want to talk about the next Speakeasy that's coming up, is the Feminist Seed Bank. And it's dispatches from the field, kind of 1 year in. And we will have people from the Midwest to the Arctic to Central China, all the different people that we are partnering with, led by the amazing artist Melissa Potter, really thinking about amplifying women's histories and fighting for a kind of climate justice, not just can we clean up what we've got broken. And I can't tell you how much it pleases me to see you all here and doing the work that you're doing. This is a rough time. And if it isn't a rough time for you, you're not paying attention. And to be able to still do the work you're doing, take the risks, be as generous as you are, as creative, as fabulous. And we can't thank you enough for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. The survey link just popped up. So if you all wouldn't mind clicking on that before you exit Zoom today, we would love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much, Kata and Hank and Marisa. It's been such a joy. We love speaking with you. We can't wait to see what you do next. Mwah.
Thank you for what you do. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.